Hi, everyone who is here virtually or in person. Thank you for joining us for the latest iteration of WGBH News' Digital Town Hall, coming to you from the Boston Public Library. My name's Adam Reilly. I'm a political reporter at WGBH News, and I'm thrilled to say that I am joined this evening by Andrew Yang. He is a graduate. Yes, let's hear the applause.
Thank you, Boston. Thank you, Yang Gang.
He is, as many of you out there know, a graduate of Brown and Columbia Universities. In the past, he's been an attorney, an entrepreneur, and a philanthropist, and now he just happens to be a candidate for the Democratic presidential nomination, which is why he's here tonight. Thank you for being here.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Adam.
Let me start off by asking you about your personal history with the idea of universal basic income. Like a lot of people, I have heard you discuss UBI, a ton during the campaign. I've thought more about it than I ever had before, but I don't know your sort of personal intellectual path to becoming as passionate about the idea as you are. So what was that path? How did you come to think that UBI is as important as you do?
In 2009, in the aftermath of the financial crisis that devastated so many communities, I thought that I had some insight as to why that had happened, because a lot of the people I'd gone to Exeter and Brown and Columbia with had gone to Wall Street, and some of them had even come up with the exotic financial instruments that had helped crash the economy. So I quit my job and started a nonprofit called Venture for America a year and a half later in 2011 that helped train and enlist entrepreneurs to create jobs and businesses in places like Detroit, Cleveland, St. Louis, Baltimore, Birmingham, places I frankly had never been. I'm a Northeastern product. I was educated in New England. And I was blown away by the disparities between Michigan and Manhattan, or St. Louis and San Francisco, where you feel like you're traversing dimensions or decades or ways of life. And my organization's mission is to create thousands of jobs throughout the country, which we successfully did. And I started to feel like for every job we were creating, we were pouring water into a bathtub that had a giant hole ripped in the bottom. And this became heightened when Donald Trump became our president in 2016. And I realized that we had automated away millions of manufacturing jobs in Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, the swing states that needed to win. So the reason I became focused on universal basic income was that while I was running Venture for America, I was reading books about the future of work. And many of these books about the future of work said, we're going to automate away millions of jobs and we're going to need a universal basic income at some point. And when Trump won, I realized that that point is now.
That point is now because, and I think I'm following your lead here, because economic anxiety is so acute that this is a tool that would help to address it and change the way that we live amidst this economic anxiety. Am I getting that right?
We're in the midst of the greatest economic transformation in the history of our country, what experts are calling the fourth industrial revolution. And what happened to those 4 million manufacturing workers was just the beginning. The fourth industrial revolution is now shifting to workers in retail, call centers, fast food and food service, truck driving, and on through the economy. And as artificial intelligence leaves the lab and starts hitting various industries and corporations, the changes are just going to accelerate. And our labor market is not adapting right now. So Donald Trump is not the cause of all of our problems. He's a symptom. He's a manifestation of these fundamental economic changes that are transforming our way of life underneath our feet.
As you know, there are a lot of people who don't buy the idea that President Trump was elected due to economic anxiety. There are people who contend that he could never have been elected if he wasn't following the first African-American president. There was a racist backlash that helped put him into the Oval Office. Also, people who argue that if he hadn't run against Hillary Clinton, who seems to inspire a particular brand of misogynist animus, at least among some portions of the population, that he wouldn't have been elected. So when you think about where we are at right now politically, how much of it is economic anxiety and how much of it is perhaps those other forces that I just mentioned?
I'd say two things. Number one, if you dig into the voter data district by district, there's a straight line up between the adoption of industrial automation in that voting district and the movement towards Donald Trump. If a manufacturing plant closes and people lose their jobs, that voting area goes from blue to red very, very quickly. And that's straight out of the numbers. The second thing is that economic anxiety actually underpins a lot of the cultural issues you're talking about. If you have a child who's born in the 1990s, there's only a 50-50 chance that your child's going to have a better life than you did. In the 1940s, that was a 93% chance. So let's say you're the parent of a child that has an unclear future and you become anxious and uncertain about it, and then someone comes on your TV screen and says, hey, these people are to blame, then all of a sudden you're much more receptive to that kind of terrible leadership than you would have been if you felt great about your kid's prospects.
You're reminding me of a cartoon that I think you retweeted at some point where there's a kind of a classic stereotypical blue-collar worker sitting with a robot, and the robot says something about, I'm afraid that an immigrant's going to steal my job or something like that, right? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
here?
and then the robot's like, don't worry about it.
Okay, that's right, thank you. I want to get some Facebook questions in here. And by the way, please do keep those coming. I have a zillion things I'd like to ask Andrew. There is not enough time for all of my questions, but we'd like to get as many of yours as we can into the mix. So, who's going to pay for the Universal Basic Income Plan, asks John on Facebook.
Well, if you look up, you have Amazon, this trillion-dollar tech company that's closing 30% of America's stores and malls. Being a retail worker is the most common job in most of the country. The average retail worker is a 39-year-old woman, making between $9 and $10 an hour. And how much is Amazon paying in taxes, even while it's soaking up $20 billion in business every single year? Zero. That is the math. That is why everyone's looking around wondering where the money is going. So if we get the American people our fair share of every Amazon sale, every Google search, every Facebook ad, every robot truck mile, we can generate hundreds of billions in new revenue very, very quickly and start paying for a dividend of $1,000 a month for every American. A study just came out that said that our data is now worth more than oil. So where are the data checks? The data checks are all going to Facebook, Amazon, Google, and these trillion-dollar tech companies that are paying zero or near zero in taxes.
Tell me more about how the value-added tax would work. And one question that Joe on Facebook has is, what's the short list of products that would be exempt from it? So flesh out the VAT in a little more detail.
So other countries have figured this out. They looked up and said it's unacceptable for a trillion-dollar company to pay zero in taxes, so they have a value-added tax in place that gives the public a tiny slice. And the great thing about a value-added tax is you can ratchet it up slightly on luxury goods, let's call them yachts, and you can have a lower rate or even exempt consumer staples. Let's call them diapers. We can make choices that actually mitigate the impact on the consumer goods that we buy every single day, and then ramp them up for luxury goods for the people that can most afford them.
Now, am I right that your projection of how UBI would be implemented so that every adult got $1,000 a month, it relies on some optimistic assumptions about economic growth, right, that would be unleashed by UBI?
Well, we live in a country where 78% of us are living paycheck to paycheck, and almost half of us can't afford an unexpected $400 bill. So after we put $1,000 into our hands, we're going to spend most of it. It's going to circulate over and over again throughout our communities on things like daycare expenses and Little League signups and car repairs and tutoring services. And so this trickle-up economy ends up generating higher levels of economic activity across the board. If I managed to slip $1,000 into Jeff Bezos' bank account, it would have literally zero effect on the economy. It would just be like one digit changed in one of his accounts. No one would even know. But you put $1,000 into the hands of the average American, this is going to go right back into the Main Street businesses around where they live every day.
Why not means test UBI and give affluent people less or nothing at all and lower income people more?
There's one state that's had a dividend for almost 40 years, where everyone in that state gets between $1,000 and $2,000 a year, no questions asked. And that state is Alaska. They pay for it with oil money, and what I'm suggesting is that technology is the oil of the 21st century. Now, in Alaska, everyone gets it from the richest Alaskan to the poorest. And what that does is it universalizes it. It makes it so there's no stigma. It's very popular. There's no I get it, you don't get it. And there's no reporting requirement, so there's no game playing where it's like, oh, I made less money this year. I'm going to try and figure out a way to get the dividend. It's one reason why this is still wildly popular almost 40 years later in a deep red conservative state. There are many advantages to making it non-means tested. The other thing is my plan would get billions from Jeff Bezos, and so if we try and send him $1,000 a month to remind him he's an American, it's probably a good thing.
A couple more UBI questions for you. As you know, some people are concerned about UBI because they think it would diminish support for programs like Social Security and Medicaid. Is that a possible risk of going down the UBI route?
Well, it's not a risk under my plan because it doesn't touch Social Security or Medicaid. It gets stacked on top. And if you look at Social Security in particular, we're in an era where almost half of Americans will never retire. They'll just be working until the day they die because they do not have adequate retirement savings. But if you put the freedom dividend on top of Social Security benefits, you can actually start building an economy that lets people retire with dignity and also puts the resources in place to take care of our older generations and keep them strong and healthy as they age and retire. Right now, that's not happening.
One more UBI question for you. This came to me earlier from a guy on Twitter named Pat Tamino. He wanted me to ask you, what is Andrew Yang's endgame for UBI? There are two versions, he says. A left version focused on a floor of basic dignity paired with jobs and unions, and a right-wing version pushed by Silicon Valley billionaires who want to buy us into complacency and manage the problem of democratic accountability. What do you say to Pat?
What I'd say is that I'm not the sort of person who thinks that laying this foundation solves all of our problems. It's just a floor, and then we have to continue to build on top of it. That includes existing social programs, having ways to start really getting into the guts of some of the problems in our education and healthcare systems. So this is not like have this money and then we're all set. This is just a foundation or a floor that we actually have to build a structure on top of.
Tough question. Well, kind but tough. Came in from a listener who did not give their name. It may be someone in the audience, actually. This individual asks, Andrew, or says, Andrew, you have some interesting ideas, smart, well-educated, yet what gives you the idea that with virtually no government or legislative experience that you are qualified to be president? Might you think of running for Senate first?
Well, the unfortunate truth is that our government is decades behind on technology and many of these issues, and we need to catch up as quickly as possible. I am not someone who would ever say, you have to come in and run government like a business, because they're very, very different things, and that would make no sense. Government service is actually much closer to what I did when I started and ran a national nonprofit, where you have thousands of constituents. You need to galvanize energy around a vision and then try and lead people in that direction through their own self-interest, really, very oftentimes. So that's the way I would lead as president. But the reality is right now our politicians don't understand these problems well enough to solve them in a meaningful way.
Let's talk about tech a little more. You've talked about Jeff Bezos. What was your take on Mark Zuckerberg's appearances this week, including his congressional testimony and his purportedly free speech manifesto that he gave at Georgetown?
I was disappointed in his most recent testimony. His testimony last time at Congress just showed how completely backwards on technology our legislators are. If you all remember that, where they're asking him the most basic, fundamental, ignorant questions about Facebook, and this was not a surprise visit. They had weeks to figure out what questions they were going to ask him, and they're asking him things like, how does Facebook make money? This latest testimony was disappointing because, to me, Facebook needs to start taking accountability for some of the messaging on their platform. Saying like, hey, let voters figure it out is ridiculous. It's like you're a voter, you're just sitting there, your Facebook feed, and if we're getting fed misinformation, what are we gonna do? Fact check everything in our feed? Like, we don't have time for that stuff. And so if Facebook is going to be a mature company and platform and actually safeguard our democracy, they need to start taking some responsibility for the content that's coming to voters every single day. And this is not just a Facebook thing. Cable networks have the same discretion, and sometimes they use it. So saying this is a First Amendment issue is a total cop-out on Facebook's part, and they need to grow up.
I, as someone who has publicly been very critical of Zuckerberg, I applaud those comments because I felt like he was sort of trying to paint what he's been doing as honorable, as opposed to admitting he doesn't want to take full responsibility.
It is disappointing. Like, I do believe that he's got positive intentions, but this is the wrong approach.
You mentioned, or you stated, that our data is now worth more than oil. Before we talk about the implications, what's the backup for that claim?
Well, the funny thing is that you make that claim and then you try and dig into the data, the data on data, and it's actually hard to unearth just how much money the tech companies are making off of our backs, because they sell and resell our data over and over again, and we don't know what's going on. And again, this is an instance where we are totally outgunned. Saying that we are somehow going to police our own data is ridiculous. So as president, one of my top priorities will be to say, look, our data should be ours as a property right. And if we decide to loan it to these tech companies for convenience and for these services, it should still be ours. You have to tell us what you're doing with it, whether it's getting sold and resold. If you're making money off it, we should know about that and get some of the money. And if we decide to change our preferences at some point, then you have to let us do that. It's not like you have our data in perpetuity. And if we do this, then we're going to know exactly how much they're making on us. But I've talked to people who are in the data selling and reselling business, and they're saying in some cases, it's thousands of dollars per user.
Is that something that could be done retroactively, giving people ownership of and control over the way their data was used? Or would it have to be sort of a front, from here on out, here's how it's going to work? But those of us who've just given our stuff to Facebook are out of luck.
Oh, you could 100% make it retroactive because Facebook has all this historical data from us that you could say, look, this data has always been ours just because we haven't really been policing it as much as we should have been. It was new to all of us, but now we understand what the consequences are. And I'm just like all of you. How many of you have actually read the I agree and consent language on those agreements before hitting the button? No one. Like, you'd have to be, like, I went to law school. I don't read those things. No one's going to read them. So we are completely outgunned, and we need our government to come in and be an adequate counterweight to say, look, at this point, if we don't take control of our data, it's literally going to erode human agency because these tech companies know us better than our family members know us. And we think we'll be making choices, but in reality, they will have fed us like dozens of prompts that will then push our behavior in a particular direction.
Just a reminder that you are watching Andrew Yang coming to you from the Boston Public Library as part of WGBH News's Digital Town Hall series. Please send your questions in on Facebook. I will try to get to as many as I can. That said, there's a large backup now, so I'm going to throw a few at you really quickly. Would you consider
lightning round? Would
you consider mental health parity as part of your Medicare for All plan?
Yes, and I would make mental health and freedom from substance abuse an actual measurement of economic progress. Because what good is GDP if our stress levels and depression levels and even suicides and drug overdoses are also hitting record levels? So this would be a measurement of our society as a whole, and we should see it every single quarter the same way we see our GDP stats.
I got to throw in a personal follow-up on the substance abuse issue. I had not realized until the last debate, I believe, that you are in favor not just of cannabis legalization, but of opioid legalization. Am I correct about that? You would legalize opioids for personal use, including heroin?
Yes,
Okay.
I would. Because what's happened is that what started as an OxyContin addiction has morphed into a heroin and fentanyl addiction. And the government presided over the OxyContin plague. And so now if you move to heroin because it's frankly cheaper and more accessible, like we have to help you actually get off the drugs and not see it, what is a systemic failure as a personal failure exclusively.
Massachusetts, like a lot of other states, I know you've talked about other states dealing with this, there's a great big opioid problem here. And if you had maybe a couple miles down that way, you'll see some individuals, well, you don't have to go that far, individuals who are living with heroin addiction.
And this is a disease of capitalism run amok. They made tens of billions of dollars off of our people, and now we're stuck with the consequences that are killing our family members, friends, and neighbors.
I don't disagree with that at all, but I know that there will be people listening, and I'm actually one of them. Isn't there an argument to be made that heroin is simply too dangerous a substance and creates too much of a reliance on the part of the people who consume it to legalize it and hope that people's lives will not be destroyed?
They're being destroyed right now. And legalization does not mean that we let someone just like waltz around like using it. Like if you get caught with one of these opiates, we take the drugs away from you and we refer you straight to counseling and treatment. And when this has been done in other societies, use rates have gone down, abuse rates have gone down, and overdose deaths have gone down. Like our current cases of criminalization actually pushes a lot of this into the shadows. And if you're an addict, you will never come forward because you're afraid your life will be ruined forever.
So you don't envision a system in which you'd be able to say walk down the street and purchase heroin at a shop? You're talking about decriminalization.
Yeah, decriminalization is a very, very different thing than like deregulation. I mean, we have many things that are legal in the society that are heavily regulated. If you get caught with heroin, you're still like, I mean, there are going to be consequences, but it's just not going to be a jail cell. Because I talked to an EMT in New Hampshire who says that he saves the same addicts over and over again. And like he saves them from an overdose, and then they go home the next week, and then they're overdosing again the next week. And he says, like, this is a completely insane system. So we need to actually get that person into an environment that will help get them well.
Back to the so-called lightning round that consisted of one question. Now we're going to get a few more in short succession. America, Michael writes, has the highest incarceration rate in the world.
Yeah.
What will you do as president to end mass incarceration and create a more equitable justice system?
Well, first I would get rid of private prisons altogether, because it makes absolutely no sense to have prisons that operate on more profitability if you have higher recidivism and shoddy treatment of inmates. Second, I would get rid of this punitive cash bail system we have where we're essentially criminalizing poverty. There are tens of thousands of Americans who are in jail just because they couldn't afford bail. That is nuts. The third thing is to have a system that actually tries to drive rehabilitation instead of just pure punishment. And I will say, I talked to a corrections officer in New Hampshire who said we should pay people to stay out of jail because it's so expensive when they're in jail. Imagine coming out of jail and having $1,000 a month to your name immediately when you came out. Then the odds of your staying out of jail shoot up. This is the kind of investment we need to make in our people. It'll actually save us money.
A carrot, not a stick.
Yeah, because right now they come out of jail and it's going to be very hard for them to find a job. Their prospects will be limited, and then a lot of them will end up slipping back into criminal behavior that put them in jail in the first place.
I may get this name wrong. I apologize for this. This is Kaleopapa, I think, writing from Reddit. Climate change is a serious issue. Can you talk about what your plans are for combating it? And in the course of answering Kaleopapa, I know you say that it's time to start moving to higher ground. I wonder if that applies to areas like this one.
Climate change is an existential threat to our way of life, and we need to do much, much more. We're decades late on this process. So I would take the fossil fuel subsidies and move them to renewable energies. This is tens, hundreds of billions of dollars. We subsidized the fossil fuel industry for decades, and it's time for that to end, and we start subsidizing wind, solar, renewable sources of energy. The big challenge is that the United States of America is only 15% of global emissions. Right now, China is going to developing countries and saying, hey, great news, I've got a power plant for you, it burns coal. And then what does that country say? Great, sign me up. And so we have to get there and say, no, don't take the coal burning power plant. Take these solar panels and wind turbines and we will subsidize them to very high levels. We need to start protecting our communities and people. I was just in New Hampshire and they are already having buildings flood regularly that were not flooding years ago. They lost a multi-million-dollar shrimping business in Portsmouth that went to zero because the water got warmer. So we need to start making our communities more resilient, and putting money into our hands will actually protect the people who get hurt the most when there's a natural disaster, because we all know it's poor people and people of color who don't have adequate shelter or vehicles they can get into to drive to safety. So there are big steps we have to take. There's a plan on my website that's literally 50 pages long. I would also advocate a constitutional amendment to say that safeguarding our environment should be a generational responsibility of the United States government.
Are there areas that are occupied right now where people simply should not be living in 50 years?
Well, the fact is there are climate refugees in the United States of America right now. We resettled a town in Louisiana that became uninhabitable because of water levels. So we need to face facts about certain areas becoming less and less hospitable for Americans and have incentives in place to try and get people to relocate. This is not a country where we're going to show up and be like, hey, we're going to move this town, unless there are very dramatic circumstances. But we do have to try and create incentives so that people start migrating out of places that we know are going to be harder and harder hit over time.
Unnamed individual, I think, inside the library writes, do you consider yourself a humanist? If so, how does that affect your policy choices? Also, what's your moon sign?
By moon sign, you mean zodiac, right? No.
I don't even know what a moon sign is, so.
Oh, wow. That goes to show where I am with that.
So you can tweet out your moon sign later, right?
I'll
after
have
we
to
wrap
look it up. I'm a Capricorn, if that helps. I would consider myself a humanist in that we have to start trying to make this society work better for us, like the people of this nation. And right now, we're all inputs into this giant capital efficiency machine that is turning on more and more of us. And one of the things I say is look, when the robot trucks come in 5 to 10 years, it doesn't matter if you're a really hardworking, conscientious truck driver or a not so conscientious truck driver. The robot truck's better than both of you. And so pretending that we're in this meritocracy is going to turn on more and more of us over time, and we have to evolve and get our heads up. And I think that's a deeply humanist approach.
Okay, hopefully that answers that individual's question. What can Bostonians do to help your campaign? An unidentified viewer asks. Join Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Google.
Well, thank you for asking that question, unnamed viewer. If you want to help our campaign, find your favorite piece of media or interview or idea or policy and send it to your friends and family. Let them know, look, we can make this happen together if we all come together quickly enough. You're also very proximate to the great state of New Hampshire. And the people in New Hampshire vote before just about anyone else. So if you have friends across the state line, or you even want to take a weekend field trip up there and knock on some doors, if you get one New Hampshire voter to join the Yang Gang, that person is worth their weight in gold. It's just the way our system works, but you are uniquely situated to be able to take advantage of their importance.
Just a reminder, you're watching a digital town hall with Democratic presidential candidate Andrew Yang, coming to you from the Boston Public Library via WGBH News. And a reminder to everyone in the audience, feel free to circulate, go get a drink, get some food if you want. But if you're just wrapped
What
and
a great
fascinated,
studio audience.
sit tight. Yes, they're hanging on your every word.
Yeah, you guys are the best.
In, I believe, the most
I love you
recent
too.
debate, you said, and I'm paraphrasing, but this is pretty close to verbatim, that Russia has meddled in our elections, that we have meddled in other people's elections, and that it was time to send a message that that sort of meddling should stop. That prompted a rebuke from Amy Klobuchar, who said that she doesn't see a moral equivalence between the US and Russia. Do you?
Well, I was just pointing out historical facts that most Americans are familiar with. And that's not saying our country and their country have some similar moral stature. I'm just saying, look, we have tampered with other countries' elections, and most Americans know that. But it has to stop, and we have to let Russia know that anyone who undermines our democracy is going to be met with very, very serious consequences. And the American people would back me on this because we want to be able to trust our democracy again.
When you talk about us having meddled in other countries' elections, I'm guessing you're thinking of everything from what we were doing during the Cold War in Central and South America to maybe what we did in the Middle East with Mossadegh and Iran. Is that the sort of stuff that you're thinking of, rather than maybe pro-democracy pushes in Eastern Europe, or are you including those?
I was thinking about the historical examples you cite. So
Okay.
if you're curious, here in Boston, you can just Google like American tampering in foreign elections, and then this whole list pops up.
There's also a book, Legacy of Ashes, about the CIA, which is very informative. You expressed sympathy for the comedian Shane Gillis a few weeks back after he was hired by Saturday Night Live and then very quickly canned for a history of racist and homophobic comments, some of which were directed
At me personally,
at you personally. Yeah. I know you were going to have a sit-down with him. Did that ever happen?
We had a phone conversation. His team reached out to my team, and then we had a phone call, but we didn't get to sit down in person.
Without asking you to betray private details, what was that conversation like?
Well, the conversation was him explaining the context of his remarks and us talking about my reaction and what we both thought about the public conversation. I will say that my call with him made me feel like I had gone in the right direction, which was a very positive feeling. Because to me, I reacted the way most any human being would react. Like, first, it's like, who the heck is this jerk? And then my wife and I sat down and watched some of his material, and we thought, okay, this person doesn't seem malignant or evil. This person seems like a comedian that's still finding his grounding. And then I thought to myself, well, is that something I think someone should lose their job and have their career forever altered as a result of? And because I was the person he personally called out, I thought, well, if I don't think so, then I should share that. I think as a society, we've become unduly vindictive and punitive for statements that people make. And one of the things someone said to me is like, if you say, hey, we should fire this person, and they get fired, and then you move on a week later, but that person's still fired a week later, like you might have forgotten about it a week later, but the person still doesn't have a job. So to me, we need to try and come together and be a little bit more understanding about someone's mistakes or misstatements.
More questions from Facebook and elsewhere. This one from Green Apples on Reddit, who asks, how do you plan to keep emerging technology in America and not overseas, for example, the Hyperloop?
Yeah, I mean, this is to me something I'm very passionate about, is that my family came to this country as graduate students because America was the land of opportunity for people who wanted to build a life and family and career. And we're losing that now, and we have to make sure we keep it because it's vital to our standard of living, it's vital to our competitiveness. So one of the things I would do is I would try and make the government an actual partner to some of our leading technology companies when I talk to them, they're concerned about how the Chinese government is making virtually unlimited computing infrastructure resources available to their private firms in a way that the American government's not coming anywhere near. And this is particularly important in a field like artificial intelligence, where China has more access to more data than we do. And data right now is like food for algorithms. It makes it smarter more quickly. So if you combine more data with more computing infrastructure, it's very hard for our richest companies even to keep up. And that's one thing I'm very passionate about, making sure America maintains its global leadership in artificial intelligence and other technologies.
George, right here in our studio audience, wants to know, what are the biggest challenges to the education system? How will you fix them?
I'm the parent of 2 young children. One of my sons is autistic. The other one's in public pre-K. So I'm passionate about trying to help our education system become more modern for the 21st century. The first thing is we have to acknowledge that college is not for every American. Only 33% of Americans will graduate from college, and college has gotten 2.5 times more expensive. We act like everyone's going to go to college. 2/3 of Americans likely will not. So what we should do is we should invest heavily in vocational and technical and apprenticeship opportunities that are going to be here for quite some time. Only 6% of American high school students are in vocational tracks. In Germany, that's 59%. Think about that gulf. That's massive. We should pay teachers more because it's clear from the data that a good teacher is worth his or her weight in gold. We need to have more teachers because the data also shows that a higher teacher-to-student ratio is very good for our kids. And we need to lighten up on our emphasis on the SAT and standardized tests to let teachers actually do their jobs. We came up with the SAT during World War II as a means to figure out which kids not to send to the front lines. Think about that. And now we use it every year, like every year is wartime. And right now, the negative effects, in my mind, are outweighing the positive effects. We should move towards social and emotional learning in high schools, emphasize things like team building and the arts and problem solving, and things that, frankly, they can't look up on a smartphone, and try and prepare them for financial literacy. Imagine high schools where every 18-year-old gets $1,000 a month, and then you teach them financial literacy the first semester of their senior year. Do you think that they'll actually pay attention then? The reverse is also true. You cannot teach someone financial literacy effectively if they don't have money. And so we need to try and make these lessons real for our kids. I just want to close by saying that the data shows that 2/3 of our educational outcomes are determined outside of the school. That's parental time with the child, words read to them, stress levels in the house, type of neighborhood. So if we want to give our kids a real chance to learn and our teachers a real chance to teach, we would put resources directly in the home and people's families.
Do we have a couple more minutes with you? Are you closing big picture, closing
education?
education?
No, I mean, I'm just closing on education.
On education, okay, good. I just wanted to double check
because this is a lot of fun.
Excellent. Another viewer wanted me to ask you what your stance on charter schools is.
I think I said at one of the debates, I'm pro-good school, no matter what that means. I have friends who've started charter schools that I believe have had tremendously positive effects on the kids that are attending them. And so to me, you can't blanket categorize hundreds or even thousands of schools and say these schools are good or these schools are bad. You have to try and reward good schools of any kind, and if schools are not so good, then you have to try and make them better. But to me, there are excellent public schools, there are excellent charter schools, and we have to try and emulate whatever's working in a community.
Another education follow-up. What specifically, Arthur asks, are your plans to reduce or eliminate student loan debt?
It's immoral what we've done. I said before in the last answer that we're up to 1.6 trillion in student loan debt, up from less than 100 billion in '99. Think about that. 20 years later, it's gone up 16-fold. And college has gotten 2.5 times more expensive. It's not gotten 2.5 times better, as far as anyone can tell. So I would forgive a lot of that student loan debt. You'd have like a little skin in the game because you need some skin in the game. But as an example, I've said if you commit 10% of your earnings, whatever they are, for 10 years, you're debt-free at the end, no matter what the original amount was. This way, every American will have a path forward and a light at the end. Because right now, we're burdening so many of our young people in particular with life-changing debt that they will never get out from under. And these people should be starting families, buying homes, starting businesses, and doing things that move our society forward instead of paying off this debt for decades. And one reason I feel sure about this is, do you all remember voting for the $4 trillion bailout of Wall Street in 2008? Of course not. No one voted for that. And then they had a choice between our people and the banks, and what do they choose? The banks. The student loan debt crisis is, to me, very, very analogous. It's like you have our people, and then you have the banks again, and this time we're going to choose our people.
You obviously have spoken a lot about and are very passionate about the big economic changes the country is going through at this moment in time. There are two other candidates who I think of as talking a lot about these types of issues: Elizabeth Warren, whose home state we happen to be in, and Bernie Sanders. I know that you went back and forth, I think again in the most recent debate with Senator Warren over whether job losses are being driven by automation, as you said, or bad trade deals, as she said. But I'm wondering, when it comes to Warren and Sanders, what do you think, if anything, they get right when it comes to the economy?
They get a whole lot right. I mean, they both see that this economy is not working for the average American, and they want to change that. I supported Bernie in the last election because I thought that he was moving us in the right direction. I have similar goals, but I think I have different pathways there that are more modern and more impactful to our way of life. I also think I understand technology and the economy better than they do. That's not a knock on them, but to me, technology is this transformative force, and we all see it and feel it in our lives. It's even changing the way we interact with the world and our relationships. And I believe that both Senator Sanders and Senator Warren are underestimating the impact of technology on the economy. I do not think it's bad trade deals that have devastated communities throughout the Midwest and the South entirely. I think it's primarily automation and robots. And one way to verify this is if you go to a factory or an Amazon fulfillment center, you'll see wall-to-wall robot arms and machines. You're not going to see wall-to-wall immigrants, and those facilities are still right here in the United States.
How do you feel about Warren's proposal to break up big tech?
I think that there are times when we should 100% have some of the big tech companies divest parts of their businesses, especially when they're essentially playing both ends.
Like Amazon, that's the example she always gives?
Yes, like Amazon, she's right that Amazon can't be both the platform and the house brand on top of it and then just sell us their own stuff all the time. But what I said at the debate was, it's not that competition is the solution for our ills. Because if you broke up Amazon or Google into mini Amazons and mini Googles, it would not resuscitate Main Street businesses around the country. And those markets would end up consolidating quickly around one winner anyway, because you don't ever want to use the fourth best navigation app. Like, this isn't like a competitive thing, you know what I mean? It's like, oh, give me more navigation apps so I can use the sixth best one. So we have to actually abandon what to me is like this relatively crude 20th century framework where it's like, what's that? Your monopoly, break you up. Sometimes the negative effects they're having actually will not be addressed by the ownership structure. And the example I used during the debate was that there's been a clear spike in depression and anxiety among teenage girls in particular that's hand in hand with social media use and smartphone adoption. If I change the ownership of the apps, it does absolutely nothing to make our kids healthier. And so if I say I'm going to break you up, that doesn't solve the problem. What you have to do is you have to get into the guts of the social media app and say, look, there are 20 design choices you made. You have to change 15 of them because they're making our kids sick. And then the social media company will scream bloody murder and say, like, we can't do that because we'll make less money. And that's where, again, government comes in, because as a parent, the parent is totally outgunned by the social media companies. A friend of mine, Tristan Harris, said that we have the smartest engineers in our country turning supercomputers into dopamine delivery devices for teenage girls. And so expecting parents to somehow police that is just not realistic.
As the parent of a teenage girl, who's my greatest challenge, my kid is terrific, but is figuring out how to police her cell phone use. So
yes, man. I mean, my kids are younger than yours, but I'm already seeing it. And as an adult, too, you're on your phone, too. So you can't be like, you're on your phone and be like, don't do that.
Yep.
You know, your kid knows you're like a hypocrite immediately.
It's true. All right. I think we only have a few more minutes, more questions from the audience and from people watching. James on Facebook asks, what kind of investment would your administration make in artificial intelligence research and development?
So I referenced this in the earlier question. I'm friendly with some of the foremost leaders in Silicon Valley on artificial intelligence. And they tell me, look, we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars on computing infrastructure, but we can't keep up with the Chinese. So that's something where government can lend a hand. One of them said to me this. He said, look, we need government regulation on AI because all of our pressures are to go as fast as possible because we're competing with these other companies. And sooner or later, one of us is going to mess something up in a really fundamental way. And this is one of the most famous technologists in our country today who said this to me. Technologists generally are not calling for government intervention. That's not something they very often do. So if that's what they're asking for, then it must be something we should have done years ago, because it must be very, very serious if at this point even they're concerned about breaking something that we cannot repair.
Meredith, also on Facebook, how will you implement affordable housing, zoning, how will you implement affordable housing, zoning, government funds? Those are, I guess, two suggestions she has.
Now, government funds, 100%. We need to put more incentives in place for communities to develop affordable housing, because there are three things that are breaking Americans' backs right now, particularly here in Boston. I know what you're going through. Housing, healthcare, education. Those are the three things that just keep going up and up in cost, even though your wages stay essentially the same. So to the extent we can put government funds to work to create incentives, we should do that. I'm a huge fan of innovation in housing, which can include micro apartments and communal housing for single moms and other types of family units. A lot of this is on the local level, though, and the federal government should not go in and say, hey, your zoning regs are no good. We have to try and create incentives so that communities that have these NIMBY, not in my backyard regulations, actually can develop affordable housing in a way that keeps your rent under control. And I know what you're going through in Boston. Your rents just keep going up and up and up, and it's insane. You think, well, I'm living a normal life, I have a normal job, why can I not afford normal housing? So we have to help you with that. In the immediate term, $1,000 a month would actually go a long way towards making you all more portable and make the housing market more dynamic. But then we have to put more resources in place and try and help free up resources for affordable housing developments.
You want to eliminate, or repeal rather, Citizens United, correct?
Oh yeah, that was a terrible decision.
My understanding is that you have spoken openly, somewhat favorably, about this new super PAC that is the math super PAC, right? Which
Make America Think Harder.
Which is interested in supporting you. How do you reconcile those two things? Being anti-Citizens United on the one hand and not telling a product of Citizens United, hey, I really don't want your support.
I am so for getting corporate money out of our politics. And my big proposal in this area is to give every citizen $100 democracy dollars that only we could use for campaigns and candidates that would wash out lobbyist cash by a factor of 6 to 1. It's the only way we're going to make our government work for us again and take it back from corporate interests. All of that said, right now we have the system we have, and so if there are private individuals that want to support my campaign, I'm not going to stand here and say they shouldn't do that, because these are bad rules. But if someone's going to use the bad rules we currently have in place, I'd look at that and say it's unfortunate that's the system we're in right now. But I'm not going to, jump up and down and say they can't do that, because, that's the unfortunate reality we live in right now.
On your website, in your very robust policy section, you condemn, in no uncertain terms, white nationalism and extremism. But there's this strange affinity that some figures who identify that way seem to have for at least part of your message. Richard Spencer's praised you, Faith Goldie. What do you think it is that they are responding to, and does it make you at all uneasy to get support from people who, many of your other supporters would have distaste for?
I was very as surprised as anyone, because I certainly don't exactly look like a spokesperson for...
You're not the obvious white nationalist candidate.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, I'm the son of immigrants. Like the slogan of my campaign is humanity first. I think that some of the issues that we're focused on in this campaign are essentially universal, where if you look at the changes in these manufacturing communities, if you get rid of 4 million jobs over a multi-year period, that devastates entire ways of life for an additional millions of Americans. And so I think these issues affect everyone, and that's independent of what kind of background you have or many of the communities that you're living in.
So do you think that sort of by expressing sympathy for certain segments of the population that's what elicits this sort of counterintuitive praise?
That's the best guess I have. I mean, I remember one time I retweeted a New York Times article on opiate deaths in various communities, and then people took that as some kind of signal, and I was like, it was a New York Times article about
Yeah,
opiate.
you're talking about
deaths.
high levels of white working class mortality, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's just what the subject of the article was, yes.
I have a ton more I'd like to ask you. There are more questions that I would love to get to, but unfortunately, I'm being told that we got to
Oh,
wrap
no.
up.
This was so much fun.
So, Andrew
No,
Yang,
genuinely. I mean, I genuinely had a
thank
good time.
you a ton for being here. It was really a pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you, Adam. It was great to be here. Thank you, Boston. Love you. Let's make history together in 2020. We can do it.
Thank you to everyone who watched here at the Newsfeed Cafe at the Boston Public Library, everyone who watched at home on whatever outlet you may have happened to watch on. Again, I'm Adam Reilly. He, of course, is Andrew Yang. This has been part of the Digital Town Hall series put on by WGBH News and the Boston Public Library. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
You are